Welcome to Back to Life, a podcast about living a more intentional and fulfilling life. I'm your host, Nicole Green. Join me each week as we slow down, maybe with a calm cup of tea, and we share conversations, tips, and resources for navigating this journey called life. Okay, let's get started. Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. As you know, this first season of the Back to Life podcast is called the Relatable Series because we're talking about how to deal with some of the major issues that tend to come up in our relationships with others. And those relationships include family, friendships, significant others, coworkers, even the person at the grocery store sometimes. It's just how we experience one another interpersonally. So the last episode, we talked about people pleasing and how to stop it. And today I want to talk about an issue that's closely related to that. And that is boundaries, or the lack of boundaries specifically. You would be so surprised at the amount of people who struggle with setting and enforcing boundaries. And maybe you're one of them. I don't know. But this lack of boundaries often results in a lack of real participation in our own lives. So what I mean by that is that it sets up situations where we're basically allowing anything and everything into our lives to control us, rather than being in control ourselves. And who wants that? I know I don't. So to help unpack this big issue, I want to break this episode down into 3 key parts. 1, what you allow is what will continue. And this is where we'll look at how to recognize and understand the problem and its consequences. 2, how to immediately start using one of the best tools for setting boundaries, which is the art of saying no. 3, a few more thoughtful pointers of how we can approach our relationships with a healthier mindset around this issue of boundaries. Does that sound good? All right, let's do this. Have you ever heard, what you allow is what will continue? Well, that particular phrase will help us understand this problem of a lack of boundaries. One of my favorite quotes is from Dr. Henry Cloud, who is an author and the absolute guru on boundaries. If you haven't heard of him, I'd suggest you check him out. He says, you'll always get what you create or what you allow. Another way to think about this is that we repeat what we don't repair. Let me repeat that. We repeat what we don't repair. If you think about it, that's pretty deep, huh? That if nothing changes, nothing changes. So in order to recognize and address the problem, we have to really take an honest look at ourselves and our relationships and ask ourselves, what have we allowed in our lives that could be causing more harm than good? Hey, maybe you're a people pleaser, in which case I definitely recommend you listening to the previous episode. Or maybe you don't speak up for yourself and become resentful or victimized later when people don't understand how you feel. Either way, I really encourage you to take the online self-assessment that's linked in the show notes to see where you are with your own boundaries. Now let's talk about learning to say no. One of the hardest boundaries to establish is the art of saying no. It can bring up feelings of guilt and obligation, but the truth is that no is a boundary that we all need. And if you plan on living a healthy and intentional life, I suggest that you become comfortable with no, absolutely not at this time, or however the heck you want to say no, because it will come in handy and it will actually be good for your life. So think about it this way. Are you too accessible? Saying yes to every request often breeds resentment and robs you of the ability to save your best yes for the things that really matter to you and that you actually have time and the energy for. So it's okay to say no. And what you need to understand is that no is a complete sentence. That means no, period. You do not have to explain why you declined a request. The bottom line is that you're unable to complete it, and it doesn't matter why you can't do it. So you just can't. Period. End of the sentence. And that's it. Saying no is an act of self-care. Let me say that again. Saying no is an act of self-care because it shows that you care about yourself and you care about others too. Clearly established boundaries helps us to take care of ourselves emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So just say no. You can start that the very next time someone asks you to do something that you really don't want or need to do. Make sense? Okay. So let's find some courage and make some real change. You know, another great quote from my friend Dr. Cloud. Okay, he's not really my friend, but in my head, it sounds good. He sums up the boundaries quite well, where he says, boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. Boundaries help to keep the good in and the bad out. Well, that's a good way to put it, don't you think? So if you're hesitant to start setting boundaries in your relationships, I want you to consider a couple things. There's nothing bad about setting boundaries, despite what there might be some common misconceptions about it. And boundaries are a sign of self-respect. And most important, boundaries teach others how to treat you. I often tell my clients, you teach people how to treat you. If you don't know how to treat you or you don't treat yourself with care and respect, why would you expect other people to? So boundaries help to teach others how to treat you. And I think that's a good thing. But it's important to note that, it's not all about you. Setting boundaries means recognizing that other people have boundaries too. So there's the flip side of that. And then that means that you have your boundaries, but so does everybody else. And so it's helpful with asking for consent, which is another good habit to cultivate, before unloading your day on someone, or entering into a heavy conversation at let's just say a casual dinner. Or how many times it's like if you come home and, you've had a long day, and if you have any kids or anything, they're like, and you're not mentally ready to handle that. It's a good way to start. It's like, okay, I would like to vent. Is this a good time? Just asking whether it's being mindful of someone else and them being mindful of you. Because by honoring others' boundaries, you're also demonstrating awareness, mindfulness, and just how strong your own boundaries and self-respect happens to be. Does that make sense? So how do we start getting better boundaries? There are a few key points that'll help you in your boundary setting journey. And you can find more tips and resources that are linked in the show notes for this episode. But one is know thyself to know your boundaries. Establish what is okay and not okay for you. Sometimes that's hard because people don't know their limits or aware of what they need. And so it's important to stop and pause and pay attention to what you need, what's in your way, and what needs to go. Also, you can consider both your past and your present relationships and how they were or are currently affecting your boundaries right now. So it starts with know yourself and getting some awareness. And then it goes into being honest and being clear and being direct and also being done. Let me just clarify that a little bit. Enforce boundaries that you set with this mantra. Be honest, be clear, be direct, and be done. It just keeps it really simple, and it kind of keeps you focused on what is necessary and what's not. Once you decided on a firm boundary, make sure that you are able to communicate that with some clarity and firmness to those around you. Don't hesitate to shrink away from this and never allow anyone to weasel their way past your boundaries or try to convince you that it's unreasonable. These are your boundaries. Be honest, be clear, be direct, and be done. It is also important for you to make self-care a priority. Like I said, learning to say no is an act of self-care. Recognizing where you are able to do something and when you're not able to do something, and then being honest and clear and direct about that. You won't regret it. And finally, seek support if you need help in establishing healthy boundaries. It's not easy, especially if you haven't had any boundaries set up, before, and you don't know where to start or where exactly you might need boundaries. So it's important not to do this journey by yourself. Okay, that's all for today. I hope you find some help and encouragement from this short and sweet rundown on boundaries. You can review these tips plus find links to more information and resources in the show notes for this episode. And be sure to check out the next episode in the Relatable series for more advice on building better relationships. Until then, be well. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Back to Life podcast. Be sure to click subscribe so that you'll continue to engage with our new Back to Life community. Oh, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Hey There Nicole Green for more inspiration and tips on intentional living. Tune in next time on the Back to Life podcast as we discuss those relatable struggles of life with a dose of hope and healthy solutions. Until then, be well.